A dock worker in New Orleans recorded a song so big it bankrupted the label that released it. A Brill Building songwriter needed 100 takes to nail the one song that made him famous. And one Detroit riot inspired the biggest pride anthem of the decade. 12 records, one extraordinary year. This is Groove Lens, and this is the sound that ruled 1967. Let's count them down. Number 12, Make Me Yours, by Betty Swan. Betty Swan was born Betty Jean Champion in Shreveport, Louisiana, and by the mid-1960s, she was recording for Money Records, a small independent label out of Los Angeles that most listeners had never heard of. She wasn't handed songs by a big-name writing team the way most soul singers of her era were. She wrote her own material, start to finish, working closely with producer Arthur Wright to shape every arrangement herself.
Now that I found you, I wanna stay around.
Make Me Yours was one of those self-written songs, a warm, patient ballad built around Swan's clear, unadorned voice and a gentle horn arrangement that never overplays its hand. There's no studio trickery here, no big orchestral swell. Just a singer who knew exactly what she wanted to say and exactly how she wanted to say it.
To take full control, yeah, I need a little.
The record climbed all the way to #1 on the R&B chart in the summer of 1967 and crossed into the Pop Top 30, an enormous achievement for an artist on such a small independent label competing against Motown and Stax's promotional machines. It remains the single biggest hit of Swan's career and her only #1.
Loving arms make me feel secure and warm.
She kept recording for years afterward, eventually moving toward country soul crossovers that were ahead of their time, and even signed with major labels like Capitol and Atlantic. But nothing ever matched the quiet, self-assured triumph of Make Me Yours, a song written, shaped, and delivered entirely on her own terms, in an industry that rarely allowed singers that kind of control. What makes her story worth remembering is exactly that independence. In an era when most soul hits came stamped with a famous producer's name or a hit factory's house sound, Swan built hers from scratch on a shoestring label most people had never heard of and still managed to outchart artists with far bigger machines behind them.
So make me yours, make me yours.
Number 11, Are You Lonely for Me, by Freddie Scott. Freddie Scott didn't start out as a singer chasing hits. He started out as a songwriter. In the early 1960s, he was working inside the Brill Building for Alden Music, writing songs for other performers. He'd already had a hand in Hey Girl, a song he wrote with Carole King and Jerry Goffin, and ended up recording himself almost by accident after the artist it was intended for missed the session. By 1966, Scott's solo career had stalled, and he signed with producer Burt Burns at the newly formed Shout Records. Burns handed him Are You Lonely for Me, a slow-burning, gospel-soaked ballad, and the recording session became legendary for all the wrong reasons. It reportedly took Scott over 100 vocal takes to get the performance right, an exhausting process that pushed both singer and producer to their limits.
Yes, I am. Are you lonely for me?
Every one of those takes was worth it. Backed by Cissy Houston and the Sweet Inspirations on vocals, the finished record is raw and aching in a way few ballads of the era matched. It topped the R&B chart for 4 straight weeks in early 1967, becoming Scott's biggest hit as a performer. Tragically, Burt Burns died of a heart attack at the end of that same year, and Shout Records never fully recovered. Scott kept recording into the 1970s, but Are You Lonely for Me remained the peak, a songwriter's 100-take masterpiece that outlasted the label that made it. There's a nice symmetry to how his career unfolded. Scott spent years writing hits for other people's voices before this song finally proved he could carry one of his own. Decades later, his original recording would resurface again, sampled by hip-hop artists who recognized exactly what those 100 takes had captured.
I'm sorry. Hey,
Number 10, Tell It Like It Is by Aaron Neville. Aaron Neville was working as a longshoreman on the docks of New Orleans when he recorded this song, cut for a brand new, barely funded local label called Parlo Records. Nobody involved, least of all Neville himself, expected much from it. He was paid a flat session fee and went right back to unloading cargo ships the next morning. Then the record started climbing. Tell It Like It Is rode its way to number 1 on the R&B chart and all the way to number 2 on the pop chart, kept off the top spot only by the Monkees. It sold over 1 million copies and earned a gold disc, transforming Neville almost overnight from a dock worker who sang on weekends into a nationally known voice. Here's the cruel twist. Parlo had given away half its publishing royalties just to get the record pressed and distributed, and between that arrangement and the runaway success of the single, the label couldn't cover its own bills. It went bankrupt within a year, seized by the IRS, and Neville says he never received a cent in royalties for a song that sold over 1 million copies. He spent the years afterward working odd jobs again, longshoreman, truck driver, house painter, while Tell It Like It Is kept playing on radios across the country without him seeing a dime. Decades later, he'd find lasting success with the Neville brothers, but this one, the song that made his name, cost him almost everything it should have earned him. He's re-recorded it more than once over the years, as if trying to reclaim something the original release never let him keep. Even so, it's the 1966 original, cut at 25 by a man who thought he might spend his whole life drifting between longshoreman jobs, that still holds up as the definitive version. Number 9, Jimmy Mack by Martha and the Vandellas. Motown's writing machine ran deep, and sometimes a song sat in the vault for years before anyone decided the moment was right. Jimmy Mack was written and produced by Holland Dozier Holland and actually recorded back in 1964, but Motown held the track back, releasing other Vandellas singles first and letting this one wait its turn. By the time it finally came out in 1967, the world had changed around it, but the song itself hadn't lost a step. Martha Reeves takes the lead with a longing, pleading delivery, singing from the perspective of a woman waiting for a boyfriend who's been gone too long, a lyric that took on new weight for listeners with loved ones serving overseas during the Vietnam War, even though the song had been written years before that context existed. The record became the group's 4th number 1 R&B hit and their final top 10 pop single in the United States, peaking at number 10 on the Hot 100. It's built on the same driving, hand-clap-heavy Motown formula that made the Vandellas famous, but there's an urgency in Reeves's vocal that feels different from their earlier hits. Less party, more genuine ache. It's a reminder that even inside Motown's famously efficient assembly line, timing mattered as much as talent. A song can sit finished and forgotten for 3 years and still turn out to be exactly what the moment needed. The Vandellas never quite matched this level of chart success again. Lineup changes and shifting priorities at Motown meant the label's attention increasingly turned elsewhere, but Jimmy Mack stands as the group's last great statement, proof that Reeves's voice could carry both party anthems and genuine longing with equal conviction. Number 8, Funky Broadway by Wilson Pickett.
Funky Broadway.
This one didn't start with Wilson Pickett at all. It was written by Arlister Dyke Christian and originally recorded by his own band, Dyke and the Blazers, on a tiny Phoenix, Arizona label in 1966. Their version did respectably on the R&B charts, but nowhere close to what was coming. Producer Jerry Wexler brought Wilson Pickett down to Muscle Shoals, Alabama in early 1967 to cut his own take on the song, backed by the same session musicians who'd already powered hits for Percy Sledge and Aretha Franklin. Pickett only recorded the first half of the original song structure, tightening it into something leaner and considerably more explosive, his growling, shouted vocal riding on top of a groove built specifically for the dance floor. The gamble paid off enormously. Pickett's version became the definitive one, climbing to #1 on the R&B chart and reaching the top 10 on the pop chart, one of only 2 top 10 pop hits of his career. It also carries a genuine piece of music history. It's considered the first charting single to ever use the word funky directly in its title, a small linguistic milestone for an entire genre that hadn't fully named itself yet.
Shake, shake, shake. You don't know.
Dyke and the Blazers kept recording, kept innovating, and never got anywhere close to this level of mainstream recognition again. Sometimes the artist who writes the blueprint isn't the one the world remembers building the house. Pickett, meanwhile, added yet another chart topper to an already remarkable run, cementing Muscle Shoals as the place soul singers went when they needed something rawer than what New York or Detroit studios could offer.
Shake, shake, shake. You don't know.
Most people scrolling past these songs today have no idea what it actually took to make them. The bankrupt labels, the 100-take sessions, the songs held back for years before their moment finally came. Groove Lens digs that history back up, one record at a time. If that's worth your time, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means you won't miss the next one. Number 7. Your Love Keeps Lifting Me, Higher and Higher, by Jackie Wilson.
Higher than I've ever been.
By 1967, Jackie Wilson was nearly 3 years removed from a hit record, a rough stretch for an artist who'd once been one of R&B's biggest stars. Producer Carl Davis brought him this song, originally written for the Dells, who'd recorded it but never released their version. Wilson's first attempt at it leaned slow and soulful, a straightforward ballad. Davis wasn't satisfied. He pushed Wilson to abandon the slow approach entirely and pumped the energy up instead, and Wilson responded by cutting the entire lead vocal in a single take, delivering the joyous, soaring performance the world would come to know. The backing track came together in Chicago with a group of session musicians who'd driven over from Detroit, specifically for the weekend, members of Motown's own Funk Brothers, moonlighting for cash under the table. Released in August of 1967, Higher and Higher became a massive crossover hit, climbing to #1 on the R&B chart and #6 on the pop chart. And it remains one of the most purely uplifting records to ever come out of the era, a song that decades later, critics still describe as one of the greatest feel-good songs ever recorded.
I can stand up and face the world.
It also turned out to be bittersweet. This was Jackie Wilson's 6th and final #1 R&B hit, the last time he'd reached that peak. He kept performing and recording for years, but the song that revived his career after a 3-year slump ended up being the very last time he'd stand at the very top of the charts again. Number 6. Love Is Here and Now You're Gone, by the Supremes. By late 1967, Diana Ross, Mary Wilson, and Florence Ballard had already spent years at the absolute peak of American pop music, and Holland Dozier Holland kept finding new ways to push their sound forward. Love Is Here and Now You're Gone opens with a dramatic, almost cinematic string flourish before settling into a groove that carries genuine sorrow underneath its polish.
You close the door to you.
The lyric describes love collapsing almost too quickly to process, and Ross delivers it with a controlled, aching restraint that had become the group's signature, never breaking down completely, always holding something back, letting the arrangement carry the weight her voice refuses to fully release. It's a masterclass in Motown's particular gift for wrapping genuine heartbreak inside a record built for the dance floor.
You made me love you.
The song became the group's 9th #1 hit and one of the rare 1967 R&B chart toppers to also top the all-genre pop chart simultaneously, an achievement only a handful of records managed that entire year. It cemented the Supremes not just as hitmakers but as one of the defining pop acts of the decade, regardless of genre or radio format. Behind the scenes, though, cracks were already forming. Florence Ballard would leave the group within months, and the classic lineup that had built this run of hits was nearing its end, even as the records themselves kept climbing higher than almost anyone else on the chart that year. Listening back now, there's an eerie quality to that timing. A song about love, ending abruptly, released right as the group's own founding chemistry was quietly starting to fracture behind the curtain. Number 5, Cold Sweat by James Brown. James Brown recorded this one in May of 1967 at King Studios in Cincinnati, built from an idea that had been gestating for years inside an earlier, much slower song of his called I Don't Care. Working with bandleader Alfred Pee Wee Ellis, Brown stripped the arrangement down to almost nothing. One single chord change for the entire song, a radical departure from the conventional blues structures that had defined R&B up to that point. Ellis had been listening heavily to Miles Davis's So What and its 2-chord vamp, and that modal jazz influence bled directly into the arrangement, letting the entire band lock into a hypnotic, endlessly repeating groove instead of following a traditional verse-chorus chord progression. Every instrument in the band, horns, guitars, everything, gets used percussively, hitting hard on the one at the top of each bar, a rhythmic emphasis that would go on to define funk as a genre for decades afterward. Released as a 2-part single in the summer of 1967, Cold Sweat shot straight to #1 on the R&B chart and reached #7 on the pop chart, and its influence dwarfed even those impressive numbers. In 2016, Cold Sweat, Part 1, was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame, recognized as the record that essentially invented modern funk in real time, 3 minutes at a time. It's the sound of an artist who'd already reinvented R&B, once deciding to reinvent it again, almost daring the rest of the industry to catch up. By some accounts, the entire song was recorded in essentially one take, live, with no overdubs, thanks to a band that had spent countless nights on the road together and could lock into a groove almost by instinct. That's the kind of discipline only James Brown's outfit could pull off. Number 4, Baby I Love You by Aretha Franklin. This one starts with a chance encounter at a barbershop. Ronnie Shannon, a songwriter newly arrived in Detroit with no real connections in the music business, happened to strike up a conversation with a man getting his hair cut nearby. That man turned out to be Ted White, Aretha Franklin's husband and manager, who asked Shannon, almost on a whim, to try writing something specifically for his wife. Shannon delivered 2 songs out of that conversation. The first was I Never Loved a Man, the record that had already launched Franklin's career earlier that same year. The second was this one, Baby I Love You, recorded during the same New York sessions that produced Chain of Fools, with her sisters Carolyn and Irma providing backing vocals alongside Cissy Houston's Sweet Inspirations. There's a detail that makes the recording even more remarkable. Franklin had shattered her elbow in an accident during a southern tour just before these sessions, and her doctors didn't think she was ready to record. She insisted on going in anyway, playing piano with limited mobility, using only her left hand on some of the album's other tracks. None of that struggle is audible in the finished record, just confidence, warmth, and total command. Released in July of 1967, Baby I Love You spent 2 weeks at #1 on the R&B chart and climbed to #4 on the pop chart, becoming Franklin's third chart topper of an already extraordinary year. It gave her 17 total weeks at #1 in 1967 alone, more than double what any other act managed that entire year, all traced back to one songwriter's lucky conversation in a barbershop chair. Number 3, I Never Loved a Man, The Way I Love You, by Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin had already spent 6 years and 8 albums at Columbia Records without ever finding the sound that fit her. When her contract lapsed in 1966, producer Jerry Wexler signed her to Atlantic almost immediately and took her to Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, hoping the same session musicians who'd powered hits for Percy Sledge and Wilson Pickett could finally unlock something in her. Within minutes of her sitting down at the piano, Wexler knew he had it. Franklin's voice, backed by that tight Muscle Shoals rhythm section, produced exactly the sound he'd been chasing. But the session fell apart before the day was even finished. A drunken exchange between one of the horn players and Franklin's husband and manager, Ted White, escalated into a full-blown fight that spilled out of the studio and into the motel where the band was staying. The session was canceled outright, with the B-side left completely unfinished on the tape machine. Wexler refused to let one bad night bury a good record. He flew the same Muscle Shoals musicians up to New York and finished the session there instead, completing both this song and its B-side, Do Right Woman, Do Right Man. Released in early 1967, I Never Loved a Man shot to #1 on the R&B chart and into the pop 10 within 3 weeks, finally giving Franklin the massive hit that 6 years at Columbia had never produced. It was the session that built her career, and also the last time she'd ever record in Muscle Shoals again. Number 2, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, by Gladys Knight and the Pips. This song had already been rejected twice before Gladys Knight ever got near it. Motown writers Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong first gave it to Smokey Robinson and the Miracles in 1966, but label boss Gordy vetoed the release outright. Whitfield then recorded it a second time with Marvin Gaye, and Gordy turned that version down too, convinced it still wasn't strong enough for release. Whitfield didn't give up. He brought the song to Gladys Knight and the Pips, borrowed Smokey Robinson's studio time, and cut the track quickly, driven by a propulsive double percussion arrangement and Knight's urgent, commanding lead vocal. Gordy still needed convincing, but after much back and forth, he finally allowed it to be released as a single in September of 1967. The gamble paid off spectacularly. It climbed to #1 on the R&B chart, spent 3 weeks at #2 on the pop chart, and became the best-selling single in Motown's history up to that point, remarkable for a song 2 different acts had already recorded and had rejected before it ever reached Knight at all. There's a strange postscript too. Marvin Gaye's own version, recorded even before Knight's, sat unreleased in the Motown vaults for another full year before finally coming out in 1968, and it went on to become even more famous than the original hit. 2 #1 versions of the same song, born from the same writers, released a year apart, each one convinced it might never see daylight at all. Number 1, Respect, by Aretha Franklin. Otis Redding wrote and recorded Respect first, back in 1965, a song about a working man coming home and demanding his due from the woman waiting for him. It was a solid hit for Redding, but nobody, including Redding himself, had any idea what it was about to become. Aretha Franklin got hold of it in early 1967, and she didn't just cover it. She completely rebuilt it from the inside out. Working with her sisters Carolyn and Irma as backing vocalists, Franklin flipped the entire perspective of the song, turning a man's demand into a woman's declaration. Carolyn came up with the now iconic spelled-out chorus, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, and added the playful, "Sock it to me" ad-libs weaving underneath Aretha's lead. Saxophonist King Curtis punched holes through the arrangement with one of the most recognizable solos in soul music history.
You know, Ralph, you know me. All I want is a good man.
What had been a personal plea from Redding became something enormous in Franklin's hands, a rallying cry that landed directly in the middle of the civil rights movement and the emerging feminist movement simultaneously, without her ever having to explain what it meant. Audiences simply understood. The record spent 8 weeks at #1 on the R&B chart and became Franklin's only solo #1 hit on the all-genre pop chart in her entire career. It won 2 Grammy Awards, and in 2021, Rolling Stone named it the single greatest song of all time, out of every record ever made.
Ooh, you can say it's sweeter than honey.
Otis Redding reportedly said, only half joking, that Aretha had stolen his song. She hadn't stolen it. She'd simply shown the world what it could become, and soul music was never quite the same afterward.